And if you missed the video, there's always Roy Keane. Liverpool at Anfield. Debuts don't come harder than this. Remarkably, Roy Keane has played only 2 games as a Nottingham Forest reserve. He's been thrown into football's emotional deep end.
Arrived to find this absolute buzz going around the press box. Who's this kid Keane? And nobody knew anything about him.
Roy Keane had been plucked from obscurity, junior football in Ireland. Overlooked as a youngster, he was eventually picked up by Nottingham Forest, where young players were reared or rejected by eccentric boss Brian Clough. Keane seized his chance.
5 or 10 minutes into the game, he's absolutely gone and whacked Ronnie Whelan, one of the Liverpool stalwarts, international, and a fellow Irishman to boot. And Roy's just gone in, 50-50 tackle, everything's gone in, bang. And it was almost like an audible sort of, ooh, that's interesting.
It was more than interesting. Keane had overcome his darkest fear, that professional football had passed him by. Against the odds, Roy Keane had escaped his native Cork. Ireland's second city in the 70s and 80s was an unemployment black spot. Living here, his family had found money and jobs hard to come by.
I think there's a Monty Python version of Roy's upbringing as well, and Mayfield, and how rough it was, and the wrong side of the tracks, and I think that's lazy, and I think that's not really what it was like. It's a good, decent, strong, working-class community in Cork.
He's spoken himself about how Cork people tend to grow up with 2 things. 1, a superiority complex, and 2, a chip on their shoulders. I think he's got both of those.
Keane's brothers had made names for themselves as local footballers. By the age of 9, Roy was playing above himself for an under-11 team. But there was a problem. He was tiny.
Sometimes I used to play against bigger players, but you know, the bigger they are, the harder they fall, I was told. So I used to get stuck in, and that's the only thing I could do, really.
Roy had joined the Cork team Rockmount. He chose it over his local club because it was successful. Even aged 9, Keane wanted to win.
He really caught my eye at that stage, at under 14, and the guys in midfield were probably all about 6 foot, 6'1". Roy, I think, was just over 5 foot, and he was getting stuck in. He was kicking lumps out of the Dublin midfielders. But he was a very, very skillful player as well.
Roy hoped that Rockmount's success would bring him to the attention of an English club. Fellow teammates were spotted, he wasn't. To this day, rejection or even self-doubt nags at Roy Keane.
Some of the players got, trials in England, and unfortunately I didn't, but I just kept plugging away.
He rode to English clubs, but none wanted him. Some questioned his size, others his temperament. Keane was unemployed, uneducated, and left to walk his dog in Cork. At least dogs don't betray you, he once said.
Throughout his career, we perceive that Roy finds people a little bit difficult. He has more faith in his dog. Keane was rejected at the age of 15, which is a very sensitive age. You know, he's dreaming of being a professional footballer. So in the years 15, 16, 17, he's wondering whether he's ever going to get a chance to play the professional game.
But by 18, Keane had grown, and in 1989 signed for another local team, Cove Ramblers. In a national final, they were 4-0 down by half-time, but Roy's qualities stood out. Losing at football was a fate worse than death.
Roy's, willingness to keep playing, keep thinking that the game was still alive to them, keep telling his teammates that the game was still on for us, we can get the goals back here, we can, we might force it into extra time.
Roy's performance was spotted by Forest's Irish scout, who was there to look at another player. Keane gave him the impression that he'd swim to England for a trial.
He was obsessed by the feeling that I could have been left there, I could have been on the shelf.
There's Roy Keane breaking away now for Cove Ramblers.
That view galvanised him for the life that eventually followed.
In sport, rejection impacts on people in two ways. Some people accept rejection as confirmation that they're never going to be good enough. They accept it. Winners never accept rejection. They use it as motivation to prove people wrong, which is exactly what Roy Keane has done.
Keane grabbed his chance, determined never to be rejected again. But in his novice season, Keane experienced the wrath of his notorious boss, Brian Clough. A careless back pass and a cup tie caused a goal. Clough then humiliated Keane and reduced him to tears.
So obviously we've gone back into the dressing room and, heads down and dejected and fed up. And there's no Roy and there's no Mr. Clough. And the next thing we know, Roy's come into the dressing room and, he's got tears in his eyes.
Brian was good at smacking people in the stomach. He'd give you a whack in the stomach just to get a point to him. If Roy made a mistake, then he'd try and get the point to him, doing something like that.
It really hurt Roy, and he was just very dejected and head down and, again, just gutted.
By May 1991, Forest's cup run had taken them to Wembley. A year on from rejection and unemployment in Ireland, Roy Keane was playing in an FA Cup final. Surprisingly, he now admits he was distracted.
What should have been a wonderful landmark in my life became a bloody nightmare.
Keane's problem was getting match tickets for his friends back home.
I was desperate not to snub anyone. I begged and scrounged every ticket I could lay my hands on.
He needed 45, but an hour before the match, Keane still had no tickets for his two brothers. He was frantic.
I had £900 in cash. I gave my brothers the money and prayed they'd find a tout.
He daren't let people, particularly back home, think he's got too big for his boots. And that's one.
From its ruthlessness. In 1993, Forest, with this defeat, were relegated from the Premiership. Despite this, Keane's book surprisingly describes an almost relaxed dressing room atmosphere.
Some of the players were cracking jokes in the showers. I couldn't believe it. My own reaction was a mixture of guilt and hurt.
It taught him a lesson, and that's what makes him different.
High achievers are different. They take losing very, very personally. He thinks it's him that's lost. Now, don't forget, this is a man who's rejected from the game of football for being too small. So that invariably is going to impact on his self-esteem. there's always going to be that doubt. Am I good enough?
It was during these Nottingham days that a different and very unpleasant Roy Keane began to emerge. Football is notoriously a drinking culture, and Roy Keane became one of its most infamous stars.
We were staying in the Grand Hotel, and Roy comes and sits about 10 yards away from me, talking to this young lady. 5 minutes into the conversation, Roy picks his pint of lager up and slings it in this girl's face. And I thought, what the hell's going off here? And he's saying something about a slag and did who I am and all this business. I said, Roy, it's time for bed. I'm not going to bed. I said, son, you're going to bed. So I stood up and physically got hold of him. And he tried to headbutt me. And that was the first time I saw Roy Keane in a different light. Then we started getting little phone calls from people in Nottingham. He's been in this wine bar, and this fella's thrown him through a plate glass window, and he's done this and he's done that.
Keane was based in Nottingham, but Forest allowed him to shuttle back and forward to Cork. Some say it staved off his homesickness, others that it just took him back to the root of his troubles.
When he was playing for Forest, he would go home after the game on the late flight, back to Cork, make it to the Temple Acre for last orders, get a lock-in, go up to the disco, get pissed, have a kebab, go home with the lads, invariably get into a scrap. This is a professional footballer.
He's still playing the Cork Rebel, which is, this is how Roy Keane behaves. If I want to go out for a drink with the lads until 3 o'clock in the morning, I will do. I'm not going to change because the game of football deems that I should. Roy leads his life by his rules.
The fight at the end of the night was the price I was prepared to pay to go home.
Keane's off-field reputation didn't deter other clubs. As Forest struggled, Keane had shrewdly negotiated a new contract which allowed him to be transferred if the club was relegated. For a man scornful of his less committed teammates, it seems hypocritical.
Had there been any trace of cynicism there or self-interest, he could have said, well, it's okay, this works in my favour. He didn't. He did more than anybody else. He was voted Player of the Year by the Forest fans. And I think that tells you something about his value system.
On the surface, Roy Keane's value system was simple. Now go to a bigger club. Forest were the past, and a career under Alex Ferguson was his future. By 1993, Roy Keane was Britain's most expensive player. But on-field clashes would soon make him Britain's most notorious. This is Roy Keane's first red card. Ironically, he had been playing top-class football for 5 years before it was shown. It was a tough match. Keane had been badly fouled, and an ankle injury needed 8 stitches at half-time. Most players would have limped out of the game.
He really shouldn't have gone back on the pitch, but he asked Alex Ferguson if he could go back for, 10 minutes, see how it went. And it was in that 10 minutes that he got involved with 𝙇𝙄𝙆𝙀.
Keane's book is disarmingly honest.
Southgate's challenge is fair, but he catches me on the ankle just stitched. Fuck you. I get up and stamp on him.
This is the warrior. So you're in a war zone there. And you get it, you take it, and you have to give it. And people in the game will test you. And they'll test Roy Keane.
I'll obviously definitely get sent off another few times before the end of my career. But that's part and parcel of it. I'd never change my game. It's not possible. If I do change my game, I don't think I'd be half the player.
Keane the Warrior is the on-field embodiment of his compulsive manager, Alex Ferguson.
Ferguson and Keane are kindred spirits. And what he saw in Keane, I think, was something he had in himself, which was this hunger, this appetite, this complete and utter single-minded desire to win.
Alex sees in him the sort of perfect mould of the midfield player that you've got to have in the modern game. That was once the domain of the creators. Now it is the area of the athletes.
Keane had no difficulty adapting to one of the world's biggest clubs, but his ease in meeting the challenge on the field only served to underline his isolation off it.
I think the real Roy Keane is in the contradictions. The warrior on the field, the shy guy off the field, the guy who seems to come across as this incredibly antisocial loner.
I think he was lonely. He was living alone in a flat on the outskirts of Manchester, which is pretty bleak existence when you finish training. So I think going out for a few drinks with the lads was an option that he took. And I think shyness is a part of it.
I had to go and have a drink for 3 or 4 hours before I met my teammates to go out on a social occasion. You take a drink to go and have a drink is quite a problematic place to be, I think. Potentially bad place to be.
Any of his former teammates would tell you that he was actually not a nice guy when he had drink on him, and he struggled to control himself, and that you really had to avoid him.
I suppose he could get a bit aggressive. I think if people sort of got above their station, as he would call it, he would see it fit to sort of put them down a peg or two and make sure they knew where they stood.
I've obviously got involved in 1 or 2 scrapes over the years, but I wouldn't change anything, you know. If someone's going to have a go at me, usually I'll have a go back. You know, it's a fault, but that's the way it goes.
We were at one function and I think Brucey came over to me, sort of said, you know, you better get hold of your mate and get him in a cab and get him home. And I'm like, well, Brucey, you're the same size as me, you know him, why don't you do it? It's like, oh no, I'm not messing with him.
When he talks about incidents, so many of them seem to revolve around people commenting, who do you think you are? He's not that boy from Cork anymore. He's a footballing superstar. And yet, the tensions and strains for him is to be both.
Roy Keane is proudly Irish, but few footballers have demanded as much from their country as Keane. His autobiography rages against poor standards.
I was ashamed at the way we went about preparing for games.
Keane claims that under Jack Charlton, the players were taken to Harry Ramsden's before the game against Austria. The mission to complete Harry's challenge, a giant-sized haddock and chips with pudding to follow. Unprepared for this qualifier for Euro 96, the players tired. In his book, Keane blames bad management.
Some of the lads reported that their legs went 20 minutes from the end. Fucked. But they'd passed Harry's challenge.
Ireland were out of Euro 96 and Keane resented Charlton's folly.
Oh, the players viewed it as the Mad Hatter's Tea Party. You know, it was anything goes, basically.
Some of the passing is fucking scratchy.
The professionalism that Alex Ferguson brought to Old Trafford, he never felt was there within the Irish setup. And that was something that sort of gnawed away at him repeatedly.
Right! Keane's disenchantment with Charlton was visible from the outset. On the surface, this was surprising. After all, Charlton had a World Cup medal and had taken Ireland to the 1990 quarter-finals. He was loved by the media and adored by Irish fans. But Keane saw a different man, an imposter and a clown.
Roy Keane came in along with a lot of other players in the early 1990s, and they didn't see Jack Charlton with the same kind of awe that his captain Mick McCarthy did.
What seems to annoy Roy Keane is people pretending to be what they're not. Hence, his biggest insult is to call someone a bluffer. He's a chancer, he's a bluffer.
Jack rolled up, sort of got banned to play, and then sort of walked out of town. That was Jack's way of management. There wasn't too much professionalism or discipline, certainly in the way that Roy Keane would demand discipline.
I sometimes looked at him and thought, is he listening? Does he know what I'm talking about? Is he understanding what I'm saying to him? And then sometimes he'd just drop his eyes away from you, and then he'd sort of look up at you, and you'd think, I'm not sure about him.
Charlton was right not to be sure.
I suppose it came to a head, really, during a summer trip to Boston in 1992, when Roy Keane delayed the team bus. He was drunk.
Suddenly, Roy appears from nowhere. And Jack says, what are you doing? You're 19-year-old, you know, your first trip and you're late, you know. Why are you late and whatever? And he said, we've all been waiting for you. And Roy said, I didn't ask you to wait. And everybody was like, well, Black Roy started laughing because, you know, great answer, but such a one-off answer.
Mick McCarthy was quite angry about this, that Keane disrespected Charlton in his view. And Mick McCarthy stood up and said, look at the state of you call yourself a professional. And Roy Keane's reply was, you call what you have a first touch. He really cut McCarthy to the bone with that.
All of these authority figures, Jack Charlton, Mick McCarthy, if the authority that the person has and the way they use that authority, if there's some contradiction, in Roy's High Court, they're found guilty of being a bluffer or a bullshitter.
It was 1994, and in Roy Keane's mind, bluffers and bullshitters were leading Ireland to another World Cup campaign. But success against Italy and a narrow defeat by Holland in the second stage was seen by many as a moral victory. The Irish crowds turned out for Charlton's conquering heroes. Keane was named Ireland's player of the tournament, but for him it was a hollow award. He describes feeling cheated by the whole event.
A tournament I dreamed of since I was a lad had been a bloody nightmare. We'd achieved little. The whole thing was a fraud.
We wanted no more of this, you know, anything we'll do for the Irish. We're just here to make up the numbers and have a party at the World Cup.
After the win against Italy, Charlton had allowed the Irish team to relax. Some feel it was too relaxed and their chances faded in the American heat. 2 years on, when Ireland failed to reach the Euro '96 finals, Charlton resigned. The crown passed to Mick McCarthy. Roy Keane was unconvinced. When McCarthy made him captain for his first match against Russia, the plan famously backfired.
Now, what happened in that game was Keane kicked one of the Russian players and got himself sent off. As he walked off the pitch, Mick McCarthy quite pointedly refused to look at him.
Snubbed by his boss and trapped in a love-hate relationship with his country, Keane's next appearance in Dublin turned sour.
First touch for Roy Keane. And he got a bit of a jeer, as you'll have heard there, from the Irish following.
Unbelievably, Ireland's greatest player was booed. The seeds of another World Cup debacle had been sown. In United's otherwise upbeat review of the '97 season, this dark incident is singled out for depriving the team of their captain. Leeds are 1-0 up. Keane desperately chases the game and describes in his autobiography lunging after an opponent. A rash tackle he admits was premeditated.
Alfie Haaland was winding me up from the beginning of the game. 4 minutes from time I lunged in desperation at Haaland. I knew it would probably mean a booking, but fuck it, he'd done my head in.
Eventually he decides, you know, to settle this, and he willfully goes after the guy, and in the lunge injures himself. I mean, a great bit of poetic justice.
Keane has snapped his cruciate ligament, a career-threatening injury. Worse still, he knew a night of drinking had taken its toll.
He himself attributes it to being on the piss like a couple of days previously and just being groggy as a result. So, I mean, here you have an undisputed fact that, you know, alcohol has essentially deprived him of a season. Possibly could have ended his career.
3 days before the game, Keane had a drinking session at a hotel in Manchester. At 3:30 a.m. he was drunk and got into a brawl with, unbelievably, United fans from Dublin. Roy was on the front pages of the tabloids again, and has confided this was a bitter pill to swallow.
Not for the first time I felt a mixture of shame and remorse for letting everybody down. Teresa, my family at home, the club, Alex Ferguson.
Keane admits he was in no shape for the game. Too little sleep, too much despair. He describes his performance as bloody awful.
You know, you're banging on all the time about dedication and professionalism, and you're going out and getting pissed. And you're going on the field with hangovers.
Drink, regret and self-recrimination lay behind Keane's tackle on Alfie Haaland. Haaland in return ensured that Keane would never forget the moment.
So Haaland is standing over him, saying, you know, you're feigning injury, but you're not fooling me. And Roy is thinking, I'm lying here with my career in the balance, and you're mocking me. You're calling me a cheat. I'll remember this.
This really is an attack on his perceived honour. If you've accuse him of being a fake. This seems to be the worst thing you can do to Roy Keane. You're a bluffer. You're faking it.
Roy Keane's rules for sporting warfare is that you don't fake injury. If you're going to win, you do it genuinely. And the whole notion that he's a faker is a personal insult to his manliness. And the man in him said, I'm not going to accept that.
Keane's season was over. Whether he ever played football again depended on a strict rehabilitation program. Keane admits he had his own interpretation of what rehab meant.
I vividly remember drinking with Brian Robson one afternoon early in my rehab. I was still on crutches, my bad leg propped up on a bar stool.
I mean, it's a great image of this guy, you know, and his career's in turmoil and he's gone out to the pub in crutches. I mean, he could have got quite badly injured, obviously.
I was out in the piss every night. I was dancing and doing daft stuff like jumping over hedges and cars.
By Christmas, the binges had become so regular that Alex Ferguson said he would fine any player caught drinking with Roy Keane. In the United Review video, Keane's rehabilitation was portrayed in a much more wholesome light.
It's been a tribute to his dedication and single-mindedness that he's responded so positively.
Keane decided then that he was going to change his life. He started to see himself more and more as an athlete. The physical change was quite incredible. I mean, there wasn't an ounce of fat on him. If you look at his face had changed as well. It was more hollowed, chiselled. You feel there's a sign hung out there saying, do not enter, do not come close.
He was reborn, you know, as Robo-Captain, you know, with a shaved head, you know, and the broad shoulders, and a seething image when he steps into the arena. You know, this guy leading the team out who looks like he's going to war.
In August 1998, Keane returned and sparked United's greatest ever season. They were soon on course for the treble, but Keane had his eyes on the biggest prize, the Champions League. Against Italian giants Juventus, it looked as if the prize was beyond him. Within 10 minutes, United were 2-0 down.
The professional game is about doing it when you're playing against the best and under the cosh. Anyone can be good when you're 2-0 up against Middlesbrough at home. It's when you're 2-0 down against Juventus away. That's when you find out who the great players are.
For those who are in the top 5% of their sport, the drug is the drug of peak performance, being laid down a challenge and being able to prove that they're worthy of that challenge. The people who aren't in the top 5%, those are the games they worry about because of their fear of getting found out, but not the Roy Keanes of this world.
He said he knew as soon as he looked at the Juventus players after he scored his goal that they had lost it. They'd lost their bottle. And there were some world-class players out there that night. But he said when he looked into the whites of their eyes that their nerve had gone.
It's 2-2!
But dramatically, Keane's own nerve was tested to the extreme. A clumsy tackle, a yellow card, and even if United got to the final, Roy Keane knew he wouldn't be playing.
He will not play in the Champions League final this season.
Now, many other professional players in that situation wouldn't contribute anything for the remainder of the game. The fact that he didn't allow thinking about the final put him off. Something about the inner strength of the guy. This is someone who can really control his pattern of thought.
I was for once proud of myself, content that I'd justified my existence and honoured my debts to the manager.
Keane's pride genuinely came before a fall. 3 weeks later, United have won the Premiership, and in 4 days' time, Keane will lead his team out for the FA Cup final. But after a day of drinking, he gets involved in a pub brawl. The police are called, and the captain of Manchester United spends the night in jail to reflect yet again on a moment of madness.
You prick. Why me, the usual? Why me? I wasn't the only one they were bothering, but I was the one who had to get involved. Again.
He was incredibly shamefaced when Ferguson had to come and bail him out of the sales. But the fact is that the trouble keeps coming round, and the remorse keeps coming round. Yet, there doesn't seem to be any incremental growth in self-awareness.
Barcelona, May 1999. A famous night, but Roy Keane, the great leader, has been forced to watch helplessly from the stand. A victim again of his own mistakes. Being Keane, the moment of victory can never be fully savoured.
A couple of players told the press they didn't care if they never won another trophy. Hello, I thought, is that it? We've made history. Now we pack it in?
You're sitting in the dressing room literally 10 minutes after they come off the field saying the rot set in. They're complacent. They've just won the biggest trophy in European football. They've won the treble. They're happy, you know, they're enjoying themselves with the champagne. This guy's sitting in the corner going, here we go. It's all over. I mean, it's not right. It's not normal behaviour, you know.
In a video dedicated to the highlights of Roy Keane's career, this scene stands out not only for its shuddering violence, but the different interpretations that Keane has placed on it since the events. It's the revenge tackle he made on Alfie Haaland. Keane has offered different explanations, none of them consistent. The one in this video is the least plausible, that Roy Keane is the victim.
You know damn well they're going to book you. I just know I'm going to be booked by certain referees. I've said it to Ellery before, and I think he sent me off 4 times. And probably deservedly so. And he's, you know, I've said to him before the game, I said, you might as well book me now in the tunnel, and let's just get it over with.
Now, Roy Keane often constructs himself in his language as being that of victim. He's the victim of other players, of bad tackles, of strutting referees who are just out to book him. So this is very much a fighting back response. And in this particular case, of course, he says that it's fighting back for a particular thing that had happened to him previously. But when you watch it, you think, how can anyone justify this kind of tackle?
But in his autobiography, which has deepened the controversy around the tackle, Keane has since admitted it was calculated, deliberate and savoured.
I'd waited long enough. I fucking hit him hard. The ball was there, I think. Take that, you cunt. My attitude was fuck him. What goes around comes around. He fucked me over and my attitude is an eye for an eye. And don't ever stand over me again sneering about false injuries.
The parallel was not a coincidence. This is what you did to me. You stood over me and told me to get up. You don't show indifference to an opponent who has deliberately wound you up. You know, is Keane losing it? He let that go. And Roy would say, no, I ain't losing it. I ain't letting it go.
Roy's out of the game for a year, and barely a day goes by without him thinking about Alfie. He's stewing on it, he's brooding, he's waiting for the opportunity. So this is revenge that's been building for some time.
I had situations in my career where somebody did done me in a match, and I would want revenge years down the line, or maybe 6 months. It might be the away game or the home game.
You have a little black book of people that have kicked you in the past, and next time you play them, you'll kick them back. It's just that people are not quite as honest as Roy and come out with it.
I said, do you regret it? And he goes, no. And would you do it again? Probably. And then he goes immediately, it's not something I'd want my kids to hear or do. It's almost like he knows that he's saying the wrong thing and doing the wrong thing, but he can't help himself from doing it. It does seem to suggest a level of self-knowledge, but not enough self-knowledge for him not to do it.
Despite Keane's claims that his revenge on Haaland was calculated, most onlookers thought he was spiralling out of control. Keane's own video seems to reinforce that image. He's seen fighting with England's Alan Shearer and seems at ease with yet another red card.
I pushed him. If you're going to get sent off, you might as well punch him properly, because you're going to get the same punishment. You might as well be hung for a sheep as a lamb. That's what I was thinking afterwards. It wasn't even... It was just a push. Ridiculous.
Although Keane shrugs off the Shearer incident in his video, his book tells an entirely different story.
All the red cards. You're only human, Roy, I told myself. But this time I couldn't let myself off the hook. I'd had enough of my own behaviour. Full stop.
He went to see Alex Ferguson the next morning, and they talked about that. Am I driving too hard? Am I caring too much? And for a few days at least, he wanted to give the game up altogether.
He said, that's it. If I can't control myself in that normal way, I don't want to play this game. Ferguson said, no, you got to reconsider, take your ban, take time out and come back.
There are two Roy Keanes. There's Keane, who can be charming, articulate, and is, by all accounts, a good family man. And then, to me, there's Keano. sort of snarling figure that dominates United and has been created by United. Ferguson has certainly encouraged the Keno in Roy Keane to come out, because that's what's going to win in football games.
He quite clearly has anger management issues, and Alex Ferguson would look at it and say, well, he's been sent off 11 times in his career. That's what, an average of just over 1 sending off a year. Is that too high a price to pay for the player that Roy Keane is? I think Alex Ferguson would say no.
I think Alex Ferguson works on this notion that certain players have just got that psychological thing that Ferguson's looking for, something that he himself has got, which is, it's not just this quest for success, it's this terrible fear of failure. They suffer from that. And when I say suffer, I mean suffer, because failure for them isn't a temporary state to be forgotten about. This is something which produces depression, something to be avoided at all costs.
Roy, can you give us just one reaction being sent home from the World Cup?
In the summer of 2002, depression descended on Roy Keane. The biggest moment in his football career was about to blow up in his face. Roy Keane had already lost out on one big final. He was determined to drive Ireland's World Cup campaign, knowing that this was his last opportunity to appear in the greatest show on earth. It didn't look promising. Ireland were in the group of death with Holland and Portugal. But in their first match away in Holland, they take a 2-goal lead and hold on for an unexpected draw. The fans are celebrating, McCarthy is delighted, only Roy Keane feels deflated.
They asked Mick McCarthy what he thought of the result, and Mick McCarthy said, well, if I'm honest, I would say I would have settled for a 2-2 draw beforehand. And when Roy Keane was asked, he said, so what, we got a point in Holland. That doesn't make it a good result. We've got to set our sights a bit higher than this. And that really highlighted the friction between their 2 points of view.
Before the match against Holland, Keane had invited Mick McCarthy to his house to discuss Ireland's preparations. They agreed ways of improving travel, training and diet, all based on Keane's experience at United. But in the run-up to the Holland game, Keane felt nothing had changed. He felt betrayed, bitterly betrayed, because he had granted McCarthy unprecedented access to his house.
He kept reiterating this phrase when he was talking about Mick McCarthy betraying him. He kept saying, you know, and McCarthy was round my house. And the third or fourth time he said it, I said, you know, what's the big deal about that? And he goes, well, no one ever gets in my house. And that guy was in my living room. And I said, have you not had your teammates round there? No. They're not allowed in my house. And I said, what about friends in the game? He says, I don't have any friends in the game. I thought there was a glimpse there of this guy who has essentially quite a lonely, self-imposed existence where he doesn't let them in.
Keane's dispute with McCarthy simmered between the surface of the return leg with Holland. But Keane stayed true to Ireland's cause.
Roy Keane set the tenor for the game after, I think, about 60 seconds. He clattered Mark Overmars.
And Roy Keane with the first big tackle. Yes, sir.
Keane, several times, got a hold of the ball and looked for a corner of the pitch to hide in, just to take the heat off the defence.
Nicely played.
And then one of his forays down the pitch, Jason McAteer scored from. And from a position where you thought, well, we're going to be very, very lucky to get a draw from this game. Ireland won this match, and that was Roy Keane. That's what he does.
The final whistle sounds at Lansdowne Road, and ultimately the most effective of Irish performances that we've ever seen. And Mick McCarthy has taken his team, surely, all the way to Korea.
But with the match over, a photograph captured the gulf between Keane and his manager, Mick McCarthy.
It's quite incredible, the body language. Mick McCarthy has this deferential look on his face, and Roy Keane has this look of contempt frozen on his face, and he's looking in the opposite direction. You can almost drive a bus between their two bodies. I think that moment really crystallized their relationship.
But the photograph also reveals something deeper about Roy Keane.
You watch the joy on his face when McAteer scores. It's like, oh, he could not be happier. He could not be happier. It's like absolutely fantastic. Well done, Jason. Ireland, brilliant. We're on our way. Fantastic. Final whistle goes and it's bang.
It's where his family had been involved in a tragic road accident. He walks off the pitch and it's like, you know, no joy at all. So what? Move on. That's it.
I do worry for him at times like that, because spiritually, what's happening to him then? You know, where is he going to get his reward for his effort? And where is he going to get release from his pressure? And where is he going to lighten up and enjoy the moment and learn to love it?
Roy Keane, surely now considered one of the best players in Europe. He really should be playing in major finals.
Keane's belief in Ireland surpassed anything that anyone had dared to dream of before.
He spoke with Alex Ferguson before going there and said, we're going there to win the World Cup. Now, Fergie thought he was mad, but you know, how can Ireland win the World Cup? Keane would say, can we not aspire to go all the way? And I think in that way, he's different from everybody else, because I don't believe that any of the other Ireland players, before they left their Premiership clubs, would have turned to their club manager and said, we're going there to win that World Cup.
Certainly McCarthy didn't think we were going to win. Who's more realistic in that instant, you know? But if you take that will to win, however unrealistic, away from Roy Keane, you don't have the footballer that he is. This idea that I've got to go out and win is essentially what he's about.
But being Roy Keane, the heightened dream he had for Ireland was always stalked by an equal fear of failure.
And his biggest nightmare, as he says, and that's the word he used, my nightmare, was that we go to the World Cup badly prepared, with the same old shambles, and wouldn't give ourselves a chance.
As soon as the Irish team arrived at their training camp in Saipan, Keane's nightmare began to unfold. A training pitch with holes in it, no training kit, and then no goalkeepers for their first practice match.
Now, Roy just doesn't get on with it. It has to be perfect for him. The goalkeepers weren't there. And as soon as he came off, you could see straight away, this is a real problem for him. He had this massive blowout on the training field, and I witnessed that, and it was unbelievable. The ferocity of him in the moment, the aggression in his face, I was actually frightened by it. I just thought, Jesus.
He knows what the calibre of preparation needs to be like to win and achieve at that kind of level. And he immediately sees that the preparation that's ensuing can't possibly lead to success. So the contradiction creates this rage in him, because he knows, again, matters are out of his hands.
Keane's reaction was to tell McCarthy he wanted to go home. Then he changed his mind, he'd stay. Then he changed it again, he'd go. Then yet again, he'd stay. Keane's erratic behaviour struck an ominous chord with some Irish observers.
On board the Special Air Lingus.
Keane's problem of being away for 5 weeks with players, him being the only one who was struggling to stay off alcohol, especially in that first week in Saipan when they were there to relax and go out and get drunk. For Keane, that was going to be a white-knuckle ride where he had to hold on tight and try and get through it.
I mean, if any other major public figure comes out and says that they have, you know, issues with alcohol, we automatically ask them, well, does it affect any decisions you've taken? We assume that it's a serious matter and that it affects nearly every aspect of their lives.
Yes, he was part of that, and he changed. But I still believe that he's fighting the demons that have, you know, took him there in the first place. It's a battle for him all the time, and that's probably part of why we see this reaction of Roy for certain things.
Keane had been in Saipan only 5 days when manager McCarthy called a fateful meeting of players and coaching staff. It triggered a 10-minute tirade from Roy Keane. By Keane's own admission, it was candid.
You're a fucking wanker. I didn't rate you as a player, I didn't rate you as a manager, and I don't rate you as a person. And you can stick your World Cup up your arse.
Mick McCarthy just looked. There was nothing he could say. He would make a slight interjection, and Roy would come pounding on, and Mick is left just utterly naked, taken apart.
It wasn't a scattergun rant. Roy Keane had a list of grievances about Mick McCarthy, which he gave him in chronological order. It started with Boston, went through then to 1996. It seemed as though Roy Keane had rehearsed it 100 times before it all came out. He was very much in control.
The irony was that Keane has become the epitome of commitment. And yet, while lecturing everybody on the nature of commitment, he walked away from the team and World Cup. It was a moment when Keane, the irrational side of Roy Keane, the explosive side of Roy Keane, dominated. But to me, the seeds of that were sown over the previous 4 or 5 years, with his being lifted onto a pedestal at Manchester United. He could see no other person than Roy Keane himself.
Back in Ireland, Keane resisted the immense emotional pressure to return.
The country would love you back, and it would do so much to lift the morale of kids who will never have a chance.
I don't know. I really don't know. As I said, I need to stand up for what I believe in.
It was at that stage a question of letting the country down, quote unquote. He said, I'm doing what I believe is right. I've absolutely no doubt in my mind that I've done the right thing.
The sense of betrayal that he felt was profound, you know. They ruined my World Cup. But no sense of, you know, I might have ruined my World Cup. There was no sense that at all. They, you know, they betrayed me. I gave everything for this team.
When he returned back to Manchester, when people said, well, you know, how do you feel? He said, I felt great. And he thought, well, why? How could he say that, having given up the last chance to appear on the greatest football stage there is? And it's because he'd exorcised himself of all the demons, of all the rage that he'd felt about the Irish setup. And for Roy Keane, that seems to be the most important thing. Is he being true to himself?